I used to think I was a good husband. I really did. My name is Richard. I'm 78 years old, and it took me until just a few years ago to finally understand why my first marriage, the one I thought was the great love of my life, quietly fell apart in my hands. Helen and I met in the autumn of 1968. I remember the exact moment. She was standing outside a small bookshop on Clement Street, holding a paperback with both hands, completely absorbed in whatever she was reading. And I genuinely thought, that I had never seen anything so beautiful in my life. Not just her face, though she was lovely. It was the way she was somewhere else entirely, standing right there on the sidewalk, like the world could keep moving, and she'd chosen to step out of it for a little while. I introduced myself. She looked up, and she smiled in a way that made me feel like I'd been lessoned on something private. We were married 2 years later. I was 24, and I was certain. That's the word I keep coming back to when I think about who I was then. Certain. I was certain I loved her. Certain I knew what a marriage was supposed to look like. Certain that wanting something badly enough was the same thing as being ready for it. I had watched my own parents build a quiet, stable life together, and I believed without ever really examining it that I understood how that was done. You worked hard, you came home, you were loyal, and that was enough. That was love expressed. That was a husband doing his part. Helen was a teacher. 3rd grade for most of our marriage. She would come home in the evenings with this particular kind of tiredness that I didn't recognize then for what it was. It was the tiredness of someone who had spent all day pouring herself into other people, into small children who needed her attention and her patience and her warmth. And by the time she walked through our front door, she had very little left. I didn't understand that. I thought her quietness in the evenings was just her nature. I thought that's simply who she was. And because I believed that, I never asked. That's the first thing I didn't do. I never asked. We had our son Daniel in 1973, and then our daughter Carolyn 3 years after that. And the years started moving the way years do when you're inside a life, fast and full and unremarkable in the moment, though of course none of it was unremarkable at all. Daniel played Little League. Carolyn had a frightening bout of pneumonia when she was 4 that left Helen and me sleepless for 2 weeks. We took a trip to Yellowstone one summer that everyone remembers differently. These were real things, solid things, and I was present for all of them. In the physical sense. I showed up, I was there. But I understand now that showing up in a room and being present in a marriage are 2 entirely different things, and for most of those years I only knew how to do the first one. Helen had dreams that she never stopped having. Even after the children came, even after the house and the routine and the years of ordinary days, she had wanted to write. Not professionally, not with any grand ambition, but she had notebooks, dozens of them, going back to before we met. She wrote in them late at night after the children were asleep, and I knew about the notebooks the way you know about something you've decided not to think too hard about. I never read them, never asked what was in them, never sat beside her on the couch and said, "Tell me what you're working on, tell me what you're thinking about." It didn't occur to me to ask. I thought her writing was something she did for herself, the way I watched the game on Sunday afternoons, a private thing, a separate thing. But it wasn't separate. It was the center of her, and I walked past that center for 15 years without ever once stopping to look at it. By the time the children were in middle school, Helen and I were living a kind of parallel life. We ate dinner together, we discussed what needed discussing. We were kind to one another in a surface way that I think we both mistook for a long time for contentment. I told myself we were a steady couple. I told myself that the absence of fighting was the same as the presence of happiness. But a marriage isn't a ceasefire. It's not enough to simply not hurt each other. You have to be curious about each other. You have to keep choosing to really see the other person, not just the role they fill in your daily life. Not just the function they serve, but the actual complicated living person who is standing right there in front of you, changing all the time, hoping to be known. I didn't know Helen. I knew a version of her from 1968 that I had stopped updating. I loved that version sincerely. But she had kept growing, and I had kept relating to her as though she hadn't, as though she was still the woman I'd married and not the woman she had become. She told me this, eventually, not in anger, in a kind of exhausted clarity. She said, "Richard, I don't think you've been curious about me in years." And I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to say that wasn't fair or wasn't true. But I sat with it, and I knew she was right. We separated in 1988. The divorce was final the following spring. It was painful in a way that was different from what I expected, less dramatic than I had feared, and in some ways sadder for that. There were no great scenes, just two people who had stopped finding their way toward each other, finally acknowledging out loud what had been true for some time already. Helen was gracious about it. She always was. We managed, for the sake of Daniel and Carolyn, to remain civil and then genuinely decent to each other over the years. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful she was the kind of person who could do that. It took me a long time after the divorce to really sit with what had gone wrong. For years I told the story in a way that distributed the blame more evenly. I told myself we had grown apart, as though that was something that simply happens to people, like weather, like something neither of us had any hand in. But growing apart is not something that just happens. It's something you allow. It's the result of 1,000 small decisions not to engage, not to ask, not to be inconvenienced by someone else's inner life. I made those decisions every day for 15 years without realizing they were decisions at all. The thing I understand now, at 78, that I could not have told you at 40, is that love is not a feeling you have. It's a practice you maintain. It's attention. It's the willingness to be changed by someone else's presence, to leave the matter to you in a way that costs you something, not suffering. I don't mean that love requires pain. I mean that real love requires you to make room. Real love asks you to stay genuinely interested in another person, even on the days when your own life is demanding and you're tired. And it would be easier to just sit in the same room together quietly and call it close enough. I've been with my wife Margaret now for 26 years, and what I do differently, what I try to do because I don't always get it right even now, is I ask. I ask what she's reading, what she's thinking about, what she worried about this week. I ask even when I already think I know the answer, because sometimes I'm wrong, and because asking matters beyond the information it produces. Asking is how you say, "I see you. I see you. You're still the person I most want to understand." I think about Helen sometimes. She remarried in the mid-90s. A man named Thomas, who by all accounts adores her. She still teaches, or she did until recently. Daniel tells me she seems happy. I'm glad for that. Genuinely. And I hold a particular kind of sadness that isn't regret exactly, but something adjacent to it, a quiet acknowledgement that I had something real, and I didn't tend to it the way it deserved to be tended, and by the time I understood what I'd been doing, the years had already gone. If you're listening to this, and you're still in the middle of your life, still inside a marriage or a long relationship, I want to say something to you that I wish someone had said to me at 30, at 40, even at 50. The person next to you is not finished. They are not the same person they were when you fell in love with them, and they are not the same person they'll be 10 years from now. They are in the process of becoming something, just as you are. And if you stop being curious about who they're becoming, if you allow familiarity hardened into assumption, if you stop asking and wondering, and genuinely wanting to know, you'll look up one day and realize you've been living beside a stranger you used to know everything about. That's what happened to me. That's what I finally, at 78 years old, fully understood. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't betrayal. It was simply the slow, quiet failure to keep paying attention. And that, I think, is the most common way that love ends. not with a dramatic collapse, but with a long and gentle fading, while both people are right there in the room, waiting to be seen,